Steele here. Hope you are all keeping well. Just want to talk to you today about an audit document that I've put together that you might find useful if you're thinking about phonics and early reading in secondary school. So I've got some slides. Let's share that. Okay, so I've been taking a look and working with some schools recently on this Ofsted report that came out in October 2022, supporting struggling readers in secondary school. So October 2022, Ofsted published this report. Now the whole school is reading, supporting struggling readers in secondary school. It's readily available on the internet. You can Google it, you can download it, and it's a really useful document to read. So I do advise that you have a look at the whole document. But I know we're all very time poor, so if it's easier for you, I'll just keep chucking out some quick videos talking about different aspects, and you might find that helpful. Anyway, this report is very useful guidance to help us reflect on what best practice can look like and think about what we can do to apply the findings to our own settings. The facts. So we warm up with a little bit of an introduction of some quite, stark facts about reading. The ability to read is a fundamental life skill. It's essential to us all if we are to participate fully in society and the workplace. Pupils with poor reading struggle to read independently, and so of course they read less. As a result, they do not accumulate the background knowledge and the vocabulary needed to improve their comprehension. It's therefore harder for them to access the curriculum in secondary school because the required levels of literacy rise rapidly beyond primary school. So even learners who are actually doing okay at primary school, if they're struggling, if they're finding it hard, it's a really, really big jump to secondary. Without identification of their reading needs and targeted additional teaching, pupils who arrive in secondary school as poor readers are likely to continue to struggle. Kind of obvious, that one. As the secondary curriculum places increasing demands on reading comprehension, older pupils who struggle with reading comprehension do not catch up. Each year, only 10% of disadvantaged children who leave primary school with their reading age below the expected standard get passes in English and mathematics at GCSE. And if you go to the original source to that report, it gives you where that figure comes from, which study that comes from. In spring 2022, Ofsted led research visits to 6 secondary schools in which a higher than expected proportion of poor readers got to a grade 4 or above in English language at GCSE. So they looked at these 6 schools and said, you're making remarkable strides with these learners. What is it that you're doing that's well? Let's take a look at that and see what we can learn. Now, obviously, there are going to be limitations when you're looking at only 6 secondary schools. That's a very small number, but this is just a small insight into what's going on. I still think we can learn a lot from it. So the findings illustrate how these secondary schools identify specific reading weaknesses and how they provide targeted support for struggling readers. The report describes how these secondary schools make sure that pupils who have left primary school not able to read age-appropriate books with fluency become proficient readers who can access the secondary curriculum. And there were 7 main findings in this report. Number 1, senior leaders prioritised reading. Number 2, schools accurately identified gaps in pupils' reading knowledge. 3, staff who taught reading had the expertise they needed to teach weaker readers. 4, leaders shared information about struggling readers with staff. 5, schools had clear procedures in place to monitor this teaching and its impact on struggling readers. 6, as pupils' reading improved, they gained confidence and became more motivated to engage with reading in class. And 7, schools tended to stop additional support and monitoring once pupils were beyond Key Stage 3. So 7 things that we can look at, and we're just going to very briefly look in a little bit more detail at each of these 7 things, and then I'll show you this audit document that I've put together that might help you reflect on how your school is doing with these. So number one, senior leaders prioritised reading. What does that look like? What is it that they're doing to show that they prioritise it? Well, in the schools they looked at, they invested in additional bespoke help for struggling readers and training for staff who taught reading. Leaders made sure that this help was part of a well thought out curriculum and a wider school reading strategy for all pupils to become proficient readers. They communicated this commitment to all staff, raising the visibility of reading across the school so that all staff knew the part they played in supporting struggling readers. So a bigger strategy, a wider strategy, joined up thinking, lots of communication of that, everybody knowing the part they play. 2, schools identified the gaps in pupils' reading knowledge. Schools screened all new pupils' reading. They followed this up with diagnostic tests to determine which aspects of reading pupils struggled with. These tests included assessment of fluency rates, word reading accuracy and efficiency, and phonic knowledge. This analytical approach meant that schools could design additional teaching and intervention programs to meet pupils' specific reading needs. Diagnostic tests gave schools more detail than initial reading age assessments. This meant they knew precisely what to teach. So I like this. This is, matches what I say about triangulating the information you have about a learner, looking at different tests and the different information you get. A little word of warning that I would slip in here, though, is don't spend copious amounts of time planning assessment, administering assessment, analysing assessment. You're losing really precious teaching time where you could be getting on with making a big difference to these pupils. So when you are thinking about assessment, you've got to think of ways that it can be very quick, or that you run it simultaneously. You start doing some work with the pupils whilst you're doing assessments as well. 3, staff who taught reading had the expertise they needed to teach weaker readers. Schools made sure that staff who taught specific aspects of reading or particular reading programs had relevant training. Those staff also supported other members of staff. They shared their expertise and delivered internal training. The schools also gave training to subject teachers. They could then understand what pupils needed to know to become proficient readers and what gaps in their knowledge might prevent this. So training's big, and lots of different types of training. And I love this idea of kind of cascade training. You have your leaders or your specialists who have really sort of deep insight into programs or ways of teaching and strategies that can be used across curriculum subjects. And then that gets cascaded out and you support one another in the school to come up with a really holistic, full support for the learners. Number 4, leaders shared information about struggling readers with staff. Teachers and support staff knew which pupils were getting additional help, what aspects of reading they struggled with, and what intervention they were receiving. They used this information in lesson planning. It also helped staff to create a consistent approach to teaching struggling readers. So really important point there, communicating what's going on. And I've been in situations before when for example, subject teachers have said, oh, I didn't realize that that's what was going on, but it makes absolute sense now because that's what I see with this student in my lesson too. So yeah, it's just really, really useful to share that information. 5, schools had clear procedures in place to monitor this teaching and its impact on struggling readers. Regular assessment meant that staff knew what progress pupils were making and could make changes when pupils were not improving as quickly as expected. They could also evaluate the effectiveness of reading programs. And I agree completely, we've got to really carefully monitor progress and make adjustments as necessary. But also we've got to be confident in knowing our pupils and the way in which they learn and how they progress, because actually some pupils might progress very, very quickly with intervention and a rapid catch-up program, and other pupils don't have that capacity to make rapid progress, but they do make progress. It might just be a much, much slower pathway of progress, and you need to own that decision and sort of stand by. And that comes through this constant reflection and constant looking at how the students are getting on. Number 6, as pupils' reading improved, they gained confidence. and became more motivated to engage with reading in class. Hurrah, that's what we want. Some of the pupils expressed that reading had previously caused them stress and anxiety, but that the help they got for reading was improving their confidence and motivation to read. Teachers also described pupils being more willing to read aloud in class. And for me, this just raises the point that on the previous point we looked at about that ongoing monitoring, looking at pupil progress, looking at their results, yes, we can look academically, we can look at the quantitative data, are they scoring more, are they reading? But actually this qualitative information, how are they feeling? How are the pupils feeling? And how are the teachers feeling? And so it can be a really valuable exercise to quite regularly gather pupil voice and teacher voice, asking people, how are you feeling? How's your confidence level? How's your motivation level? How can we help you further? That's a really important part of the overall process. And number 7 is a little bit of a different point. It's kind of like an aside, but it's very interesting. Schools tended to stop additional support and monitoring once pupils were beyond Key Stage 3. Each of the schools assessed and monitored struggling readers until at least Year 9. However, none of them said that they continued to monitor pupils' progress beyond Key Stage 3 or once pupils had reached their chronological reading age. Nor did they always continue to give pupils the additional help once they had graduated from a reading programme. This meant that the schools did not always know the longer-term impact of help or whether pupils continued to struggle in Key Stage 4. Several pupils expressed that they felt less enthusiastic and motivated to read for pleasure by the time they reach Key Stage 4. I've seen lots of schools that are doing more beyond Key Stage 3, and I think it's a really nice ambition to have. I totally understand that the priorities might shift. You might have a different vision for your learners. Your learners might just need to really focus on functional literacy skills rather than reading for pleasure per se, or rather than reading at speed. They just need to be able to read accurately to function in society and manage in their workplace. Or your priorities might change in terms of what pathway they're on for their career or for their exams or whatever they're doing, and time becomes very difficult for schools to manage at those later year groups. But I do think it's a really lovely ambition that we can have to really see things through for these pupils and to go beyond Key Stage 3. Certainly my Key Stage 3 materials, I always say it says Key Stage 3, but actually totally appropriate for Key Stage 2, Key Stage 4, adult learners. Key Stage 3 is representative of phonics and basic literacy with older learners generally. So that's a nice one to reflect on. So I find that really interesting looking at those things. But then I think, okay, if I'm in a school setting and I want to reflect on, well, what does that look like for us? Do our senior leaders prioritize reading? I know that they do, but I want to be able to communicate exactly what it is that we do in our school. I find that breaking those statements down even into smaller bite-sized chunks, sort of sentence by sentence, and rephrasing some of them to enable them to be applied in our thought process is quite useful. So I've pulled that out and put it for you into a document, a Word document that you can use as a bit of an audit and a bit of an action planning tool to think about where you're at and where you want to go. So download this audit document. I'll show you in a minute where you can get it from. Evaluate what your school currently does. Make notes on there about what you would like your school to do. So make little comments. This is what we do. Oh, we need to work on this bit. Think about which aspect will be your priority focus, because when it comes to being the English leader or literacy phonics leader, it's a huge role. There's an awful lot to think about all the time. I mean, just take assessment or just take staff training. Those are huge ongoing areas to get up and running and then manage. So think about which one you're going to focus on. Maybe map that out across a year. You're going to have different focus through the year and have an overall plan. And then maybe make some notes about the practical steps needed to help you reach the next goal. So if, for example, you're looking at assessment, do you need to go and do some research about assessments and speak to people? Or if you're looking at staff training, do you need to put out a questionnaire to staff and ask them, what would you like some training on? How confident are you feeling? But have a look at this audit document. I think it might just help you in your role, even if you don't use it in the way that I would to fill in those columns. Just having it in your folder to refer to could be quite useful. So the place to go and get that, oh, and of course, you can do that by yourself, or you could do it as a part of a staff meeting or a staff training session. You could do that together collaboratively if you wanted to. The place to go and get it. So you can get this download document from the files section of the Facebook group, the Key Stage 3 Phonics Club. If you're not a Facebook user, don't worry. You can also get it from the website, abigailsteeletraining.com. And if you just look through the menus for Key Stage 3, it'll be on the page about Key Stage 3. And if you have the Key Stage 3 Phonics program from Abigail Steele Training, inside that video platform, we'll also put a copy of this document. You can get it from there. If those options are baffling you and you are struggling to find it, or there's any kind of tech problem, you can, of course, email. And you can email to hello at abigailsteeletraining.com, and we can signpost you, or we can just send one out attached to an email reply. So I hope you find that interesting and useful. And I intend to do some further work with this report, looking at each of these sections. So watch out for some future videos of that. And in the meantime, I hope you have a lovely day. Bye for now.